Why is it that when we play a nice mid-tempo or even up-tempo groove, our playing sounds and feels fine? But then as we begin slowing it down to 70, 60, 55 beats a minute, super slow, suddenly our playing starts to get awkward and clumsy and choppy. You may think there's an obvious answer to this, that we just need to practice our time and get better at playing with a metronome, which is not a bad thing. But there's often a deeper issue going on, and that's what I want to propose to you today. You can smoothen out and not rush your slow grooves and your slow, simple, sparse fills so that you really sound like a pro. You can do this with the technique I'm teaching you today. So let's dig in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer, the channel that's all about giving you the core drumming skills that help you know your next step and take action and really make progress and get serious results on the drums. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and also grab my free gift to you. Speaking of knowing your next step and making serious progress, grab your Drumming Progress Blueprint, a simple PDF guide that helps you figure out which drumming stage you're in, from stage 1 beginner to stage 6 session drummer, and anywhere in between. You can identify where you're at in your drumming journey based on what you've learned, and you'll see the exact action steps to level up to the next stage. This is step by step, this is practical, concrete, and this has been helping drummers a ton. This helps you know where you are, know your next step, and make progress and get results and see transformation in your playing across the board, whether it's hand technique, coordination, or music, which is awesome. And so I want you to have that, so definitely go download it, it's in the description. Let's get on with today's lesson. Why is it that your faster playing naturally sounds smoother than your slower playing? Well, it really comes down to the motion that's going on. And if I'm sitting here and I'm playing pretty quick singles, not even really fast, I mean, this is not too quick, but you can see how if I'm playing at this tempo, the stick is just in this smooth, repetitive motion, just smoothly going up and down, which means that naturally my hand is going to play with pretty good time when you think about it. Because if the stick is just in motion and all I'm doing is being a catalyst for that motion, then it's naturally not going to speed up too much. It's not going to slow down too much. So I don't really have to try that hard to play in time. And so that all starts with the loose grip and being relaxed. And so if I'm playing fast or if I'm going kind of this medium tempo, that works. But look at what sometimes happens. This is what I see a lot in students. And what a lot of people struggle with, as we slow down, this thing starts to happen, where suddenly that motion is interrupted by like a stick wiggle right here, or we're kind of choking it out, or it's doing like a kind of a zigzag. The rebound starts to get a little funky, and we lose that smooth, repetitive, just over and over again bouncing motion when suddenly we get to about this tempo, and the stick starts to pause, and things start to get awkward, and things start to get clumsy. And so that's kind of what naturally tends to happen as we go slower, unless we actually try to intentionally do something about it, which is what we're getting into today. I noticed a big issue in my playing when I was in high school. That was when I was first really taking drum lessons and I was starting to play at my church every Sunday. And at my church, in one of the services, there were professional drummers that would play a lot of times. And so while I was playing with the high school worship band, I would get to see local professional drummers play in the other service. And so I could watch them and learn from them, which was a really cool opportunity as a high schooler trying to get into drums and figure out how to play well with people. And something that I started to notice, I'm glad I was observant enough to notice this, because there were a lot of things I was not observant about with my playing in high school. But one of them was that I saw that these professional drummers were able to play things that were very sparse, or that were very slow, or that were very simple, while being super tight and in the pocket and relaxed, and things still felt good. Whereas if I tried to play something that was slow and sparse and relaxed, it would trip over itself. So if I tried to play a slow fill, like a ba doom 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 ba, something like that, it would turn into bra doo 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 doo, and it would just turn into like this chaos of like tripping over itself, collapsing in on itself, because I wasn't relaxed enough and didn't really know how to incorporate that space into my playing. And that was something that I knew I had to work on, and it really took me too long to really figure out how to get comfortable with that. Because I think that's something that's a human nature thing that we all struggle with. We struggle with space because it sometimes feels awkward to us, just like an awkward silence in a conversation, where we can't handle having an awkward pause in a conversation. We've got to fill it with something, so we got to jump in and say something, even if it's something silly about the weather. And so we don't want there to be a pause, and so we're uncomfortable with space a lot of times. But what we end up having to do here, what ends up having to be our remedy for this, is actually using the stick's motion to fill the gap between the notes. So there's space between the notes, and we can't fill that space with sound, but we can fill that space with motion. And when we can fill that space with motion, we can be much more relaxed. We've established a repetitive motion that lends itself to steady timekeeping, even if we're playing slowly. And so in a nutshell, that is a solution here. That's a solution. What really got me thinking about this was actually in college. So I ended up learning a lot of percussion, getting into college, and decided to major in music and learn marimba and all the mallet keyboard instruments and everything. And so my percussion teacher in college, when she was teaching me a lot of technique with marimba, she would always say something like, play the marimba as though you're having to pull the sound out of the bars. If you're unfamiliar, it's kind of like a larger xylophone. You've got these big rosewood bars, and you're playing it with mallets, kind of like these, but maybe yarn, a little softer. And so if you were to play it like that, you'd get a terrible sound. But if you go like this, then it's like you're striking, you're quickly getting the mallet out of the way, which allows maximum resonance from the bar. Funny thing is, that totally applies to toms and to hitting drums, where you want to hit, get the stick out of the way. And so the whole mindset with marimba was strike the bars as if you have to pull the sound out. Think of, you've got to pull the sound out, boom, boom. So it's almost like you're artificially lifting the mallet, which ends up, if you're playing something like this, imagine I'm playing marimba, then you end up creating this smooth up and down motion rather than this. Instead of doing that, where we're actually hammering it down and potentially the mallets are spending more time on the bars, we want to get them off of there quickly. It's like it's hot. It's like our hand is going onto a hot stove and we want to quickly get it off. And that's the way we want our sticks to be with the drums, our mallets to be with the marimba, where we're striking and we're lifting up. Now with marimba, you do have to intentionally lift up because there's not really any rebound. But with drums, we have the advantage of rebound, especially here on my practice pad, where the stick naturally wants to spike up. It just wants to spring right back up because my grip is nice and loose. I'm forming my hinge point, and so by putting a little bit of energy into it, throwing it down, it wants to pop right back up. So it's not spending much time on the head at all, and that same thing applies with toms. And then I can artificially lift a little bit just to help aid that, because sometimes depending on how low you have your toms tuned, there's not going to be a boom, popping right back up. Sometimes you do have to lift a little bit, which helps a lot in going from drum to drum. If you're going to move from tom to tom, you have to move in that arc motion, and so that's a big plus of doing this as well. And so to reiterate what I said a couple minutes ago, what we want to do is fill the space between our notes with motion. That way you're not tempted to close that gap. Because what happens if we're playing like this, where it's all stiff like that, it's so tempting to close the gap, because what are we going to do in between the notes? What are we going to do during those awkward pauses? We're going to want to jump in and say something. But if we have this smooth motion going on, then it's so easy to be relaxed because there's something that we're physically doing in between those notes. Now, I've heard of some drummers disagreeing with me on this, and some drummers viewing that as wasted motion, which I think is ludicrous. I think that's crazy to say that there's wasted motion on the drums by getting into the motion of something. I'm all about getting into whatever you're playing and feeling that and moving with it, because that's how you create good feel. That's how you create smooth feel, especially when you're playing slowly. And so anybody who tries to argue against that, I think they're crazy. They might be good drummers and they might manage to play well while being super rigid and robotic, but that's not me. And odds are that's not you either. And so it's totally fine to get into this motion, to get into this smoothness so that your stick is moving in between the notes. Your stick is always in motion. That's the big thought, the big thing I want to leave you with, leave in your head today, and that I want to be your big takeaway. The stick should always be in motion no matter how slow you're playing. So if you're playing something very slow, maybe the backbeat is 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe the fill is boom, 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 boom. Then let your sticks naturally stay in motion. And so just think in terms of big motion, and even if you're playing more lightly, it's still that loose, lethargic kind of movement where we're not choking down really tight, we're allowing some stick height, even if we're playing lightly. Because you can drop the stick onto a drum from up here, and it's super quiet. So that was stick height, we're using some stick height. but we're just gently dropping it, versus, you know, I could pound it out from right here, or I could loosely drop it from up here. If I'm loosely dropping it from up here, then I can much more easily relax no matter what I'm playing. So I'm just going to play a couple of fills for you real quick, just some examples of, I'll play the fill super choppy and stiff, and then I'll play it nice and relaxed and loose and smooth the way it ought to be, just so you can see that difference and maybe even hear a difference too. First I'll play it stiff and then I'll do it loose. Backbeats are a huge application for this technique, where you want to think about your prep stroke going into a backbeat so that your backbeat isn't rushed. When you're playing slowly, the number one tendency I see in students, and that I had an issue with myself, was rushing backbeats, where if I'm playing slowly, where that backbeat always wants to come a little early because it's like my hand is just waiting, okay, go. And so it's like I'm at the starting line and like waiting to hear the gunshot and go for it, and I'm just always jumping the gun. But if you can do something more relaxed like this, where there's like a up, down, 3, up, down, kind of like on the 8th note before the actual backbeat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and you're lifting up in preparation. And so where some drummers might argue against me on this, they might be saying something like, well, this is bad technique to be going like this and lifting up your arm, using your arm here. It's wasted motion because you should really just play from your wrist, boom, boom, bam, like that. And sure, you could say that, but there is nothing wrong. There's no drumming rule book that says that it's illegal to use a little bit of arm and to move your body a little bit so that you play better. The goal here is to sound better, to sound musical, and we can do whatever we got to do to get there. My belief is always with technique that whatever you're doing is fine as long as you're able to play as fast as you need to, as slow as you need to, and without any pain. And so you do whatever works. So that means not gripping tightly, generally, and not playing in a robotic way, because generally that's not going to deliver you good results. So being relaxed and loose and allowing some arm movement when you're moving around the kit, that's what you want to do. You don't have to sit exactly here and keep your wrist right here the way some drummers might try to do. Maybe it works for them, but it's totally fine to relax and get your body into it and use that loose arm motion to make it happen. So with those slow backbeats, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then right hand on the hi-hat is just smoothly going up and down. And what you can practice actually to get more and more comfortable with this is just doing this, like air playing. Hitting nothing, just moving the stick back and forth and trying to see how slowly can I do this. Up, down, up, down, up, down. What do I have to do with my hand to make this happen? So instead of it being like that, see if you can get this going on. Because if you can do this in the air, you can figure out, all right, we're going to toss it up gently with the wrist and use a little bit of this twisting motion between thumb and fingers to gently bring it up, and then use a little bit of gravity to let it fall down gently. If you can figure that out, then you can totally just apply that to any surface that you're hitting. You can then apply that to the pad. that gentle lifting motion, and it starts to become second nature. I think backbeats are probably the biggest, most important application of this. Always having that prep stroke, that way your stick is not rushing into the backbeat, because that's so key with making a slow groove feel relaxed, making sure that that backbeat is not rushed. If the backbeat is rushed, it causes the groove to trip over itself and fall apart. But if you can keep it right on the beat or even laid back, that'll feel great. The reason why I call this slow motion drumming in the thumbnail is because literally we want for our motion when we're playing slowly to look just like our motion if we made a slow motion video of ourselves playing faster. So say we're playing extremely slow, compare that with a video of you playing like 8 times faster, or maybe 4 times faster at a fourth that speed. Because when you're playing fast, naturally the sticks are in that smooth, repetitive motion like we talked about a minute ago. And we want, as we get slower, to actually maintain that same motion. And so that's a big concept here that I want to make sure you're taking away from this, is that as you go slower, we want to preserve that smooth up and down, that smooth, continuous, uninterrupted, unrobotic, unstiff movement, just like you're watching a slow-mo video of yourself playing quickly. That's what we want. That way, motion is filling the space between notes. Let's get practical. How do we practice this? What are the action steps? What should you practice every day so that you're working toward this, so that your slow playing is getting more relaxed? Because I believe the mark of a great drummer, something that sets a pro drummer apart from an amateur, is the pro drummer's ability to play something really slowly, really well. A lot of times amateur players can get by with the flashy, quick stuff and the chops even, but when we try to slow it down, things fall apart. And a lot of times that exposes flaws in technique or flaws in the ability to relax and do this slow motion drumming thing. So this is something that sets a pro apart from an amateur. I want you to sound like a pro. I don't want you, just because you are not a professional drummer, just because maybe you play in your bedroom or you play at your church every Sunday, that doesn't mean you have to stay amateur. You can sound like a pro even if you don't do drums full time for a living. And so I want you to sound like a pro even if you're not a so-called pro. And this is a great way to really level up toward that. What I want you to do is start off every practice session with quarter note singles, one hand at a time, at 60 beats a minute. So I think I know 60 pretty well, but to make sure I'm accurate here, I'm putting my metronome on to make sure I'm really going that slow. So 60 beats a minute, it's slow. That's the second hand on a clock. You've got a clock in your room, you can play off of that. And so let the stick bounce fully, bounce all the way up, and then see how much you can keep it in motion. So it's like a ball that's bouncing. Rather than this, we don't want this. That's too stiff. I'm rushing it. It's causing me to rush when I do this. It's hard to do it in time. But if I relax, whatever kind of sound effect you want to put on that. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Slowly going up, decelerating, and then going back down. It's just like a ball bouncing. We want this to be a natural, physics-driven motion. We want it to naturally be like a ball bouncing. If that's what a ball wants to do, that's what our stick wants to do too. And so we want to make sure that our hand is allowing that to happen and allowing that steadiness. And then practice doing this with your timekeeping hand on the ride. Or on the hi-hat. This is where being able to do this, just air playing, really comes in handy because there's not much rebound on the hats. And if you're going to play something super slow, super sparse, quarter notes on the hats, it's going to just go like this. Like no rebound, the stick's going to roll off the hats. That's what's going to happen if you don't put any intentionality into this. But if you intentionally do that lifting motion like you're playing marimba, even if you've never played marimba, you have no idea what I'm talking about. The analogy totally applies with hats. With marimba, you're having to lift the mallets up, and that's really what we've got to do with the hi-hats. And so it's not that snappy, springy kind of thing that happens if we're on the snare or if we're on the ride, and that's okay. Practice doing that. And then go into eighth notes, and of course, eighth notes at 60, it's more natural to have that smooth motion, but 60, it really is tough. So you could also do alternating eighth notes. So each hand is playing quarter notes essentially, but you're making sure that each one is moving smoothly. This is tough. This is a challenge. A lot of students tend to go to this when they start alternating. I know I did. I had to put a lot of focus into this. And then apply that to the kit. Practice playing that around the kit. Boom, 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 boom. Or 16th, gung, 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 gung. Really slow. 60 is a great place to start. And so you can practice applying that to fills around the kit. And you can practice even just doing one hand. Boom, 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 boom. Or gung, 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 gung. Or really slow 16th, gung, 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 gung. And remember to use that same prep stroke style of playing when going for a crash. That way you're always moving according to what's coming next. You're always anticipating what's coming next, and you're not just going. Because I get so rigid and so crazy and so stiff, but if you're always moving in a smooth manner, thinking about what's coming next, where you're going, that helps things lock in, helps things feel so much smoother. Now, one little exception I gotta throw in there. So when you've watched me play backbeats on the snare, I don't bounce the stick off the snare. Like if I'm hitting a tom, I always want it to bounce off. Like I'm hitting the marimba, I want maximum resonance, the stick to hit the head and quickly get out of there. But on the snare, a lot of times I'll go like this. And so I'll intentionally choke it out instead of going. Because I want to have my stick down here ready to play ghost notes in case I want to add ghost notes into the groove. And that's not to say that ghost notes should always be there and that should be something you're always playing, but it's good to be down here ready to do that. And that's the beginning of my prep stroke. I actually like to begin my stroke when I hit a backbeat from right here. So I can go. And so it gives me more space to travel through, more motion to fill that space between the notes, especially when going slowly. And so I like keeping the stick here, letting this be the spot where I'm living. And then as I'm preparing for a backbeat, I'm just going hand up, and then the stick's coming up like that. And so that's the slow motion kind of drumming that we're doing here. Up, down, up, down. And I'm not trying to totally choke out the rebound. I'm not going like squeezing. I'm just letting it maybe bounce to here and then just gently bringing it down so it lives right here. That way if I wanted to go, I could easily insert those ghost notes and have a big dynamic contrast there. So that is an exception. And so if you notice that hopefully that answers that question. So kind of it's twofold. I want to allow for ghost notes and actually want to start my prep stroke from down here instead of up here. It actually helps me play with even better time when I can have a, and that's kind of the sound effect I'm hearing in my head. Kind of like the old dubstep thing. Whatever kind of sound effect you've got to hear, whatever helps you with this, whatever silliness you want to do. But that's what makes sense to me. I'm almost envisioning myself playing in a giant cathedral with all this reverb and there's all these sounds leading into my backbeats. And if you can hear it that way, if you can imagine it that way, that actually helps you play with more space between the notes because there's so much big sound. Versus if you were playing choked down drums in a closet, it's almost easier to rush when you hear those shorter sounds. And so having more open sounds, a ringier snare or ringier toms actually could help with this orally because your ear is hearing more going on, and so there's less actual silence between notes. There's more space to fill that, if that makes sense. So become a slow motion drummer. Become a slow motion drummer. When you're playing any grooves that are 80, 75, 70 and slower, especially down to 60, you're doing slow ballads, be a slow motion drummer. Film yourself doing this. Film yourself practicing this and actually compare regular speed footage of you playing at 60 with slow motion footage of you playing something really quick and see if they actually look pretty similar. See if the sticks are moving steadily. But become a slow motion drummer. It's going to help you out so much. And while you're here, don't forget to grab that guide I told you about a minute ago. your drumming progress blueprint. It provides all the steps that you need no matter what stage you're in, because we've got the whole drumming journey divided into 6 stages from beginner to session drummer. And so what's cool about this is you can identify exactly what stage you're in right now and say, all right, I can do this, I can do that, that puts me in this stage. And once you know you're in this stage, you can then see the exact action steps for leveling up to the next stage. And in the guide, there's links to additional lessons and lots of detail on exactly how to practice this stuff. And so it is literally your encyclopedia in a simplified, concise, here's what to do kind of format that's gonna help you progress and stay out of ruts and keep from plateauing, because the last thing we wanna do is get stuck and not make progress. This is your key to progress. So your drumming success blueprint, find out what stage you're in so that you know your action steps and you can make progress and get results. It's yours for free. I want you to have it. This has been by far the most popular guide I've put out over the last few months. It's been a big hit this fall, and it's really been helping people out, and so I definitely want you to be among those. So be a fellow non-glamorous drummer, a fellow slow motion drummer, and get to the practice room and work on this stuff. And of course, as always, thanks so much for hanging out today. Thanks so much for digging into this nitty-gritty, detailed kind of lesson that I hope will deliver some massive results in your playing when you apply this. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Join us non-glamorous drummers here in this community. Until next time, you can do this. You can master this stuff. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.